An off-duty police officer with the Montgomery Police Department was killed this morning during an apparent domestic violence incident.
Montgomery police and fire medics found Tanisha Pughsley suffering from a gunshot wound in the 6700 block of Overview Drive. The detective was off duty and pronounced dead at the scene.
She wore a badge. She carried a gun. She was trained to de-escalate chaos. And still, Tanisha Pughsley died in fear, inside her own home, gunned down by the man she once loved. She wasn't just any woman. Tanisha was a decorated police detective with the Montgomery Police Department. She had already done what thousands of abuse victims are urged to do. She got out. She filed for a restraining order. She told the court exactly what Brandon Webster had done to her. She told them he had hit her while she held the baby. She told them she feared for her life. She begged them, please, take away his guns. They gave her a protective order, but they didn't make him surrender a single weapon. 3 weeks later, Brandon kicked in her door with an AR-15 rifle in his hands. And Tanisha Pughsley was shot in the chest and left to die on the floor of her own home. By the time first responders arrived, it was over. Her male friend had escaped. The shooter was already gone, and a city was waking up to news that one of their own, an officer who lived to serve and protect, wasn't safe in her own house. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated execution by a man who had been legally told to stay away. And yet, no alarm system, no badge, no uniform, no paper order could stop him. So now the question is this. If a police officer can follow every legal step to protect herself and still end up dead, what chance does the average woman have? Before the headlines, before the crime scene tape, before the broken front door and the rifle in the hallway, there was Tookie. That's what her family called her. To them, she wasn't Detective Tanisha Pughsley. She was just Tookie, the loudest laugh in the room, the one who remembered everyone's birthday, who texted her little cousins just to check if they'd eaten. She was born and raised in Chicago. Her mother, Dr. Sharon Pughsley, was the kind of woman who believed in doing things right. Faith, education, hard work. Tanisha soaked it all in. She didn't grow up dreaming of being a cop. She just knew she wanted to help. That led her to Alabama State University, where she majored in criminal justice and joined the bowling team. People remember her there, not for being flashy, but for being focused. One teammate said, she was the type who'd finish practice, then go tutor someone who was struggling. No camera, no credit. That was just her. She graduated, applied to the Montgomery Police Department, and by 2016, she was on the force. Not just on patrol, not just checking boxes. She was out there building relationships, showing kids they didn't have to be afraid of the badge, teaching teen girls how to speak up, how to stay safe, how to stand their ground. She mentored at the SQL Group home. She volunteered with Transformation Montgomery, helping families rebuild their lives through housing, education, and life skills training. Online, she shared safety tips for women, firearm training resources, warnings about being followed in parking lots. One of her last Facebook posts was simple but telling. Ladies, please protect yourselves. Please train. Please stay safe. Nobody's coming to save you. She was known in the department as the one who always showed up early, stayed late, and still had time to smile at strangers. One colleague said, she wasn't just serving the badge. She was serving people. But as she poured herself into protecting others, something else was building behind the scenes. Not on the streets. Not from some stranger in the dark. It was coming from inside her own home. Someone who had once held her. Someone now watching her, quietly growing angrier, more controlling. They met like many people do these days. Mutual friends, shared circles, nothing remarkable. Brandon Webster was younger than Tanisha by a few years, but in the beginning, that didn't seem to matter. He was charming enough, polite, knew how to say the right things at the right time. And at first, it looked normal from the outside. They went from dating to living together, bought a house, joint ownership on Overview Drive in East Montgomery. To outsiders, it looked like two people building a future. But something was off. Quietly at first, he'd question where she was going, who she was texting, what she was wearing on certain days. Things that sound like concern until they start happening every single day. And for Tanisha, a detective who had worked domestic violence cases herself, it had to be disorienting. Because she knew the signs. She'd seen the patterns. But when it's happening to you, it doesn't always look the same. Webster began isolating her. From certain friends. From some family. Subtle guilt trips about how much time she spent at work. He made her second-guess herself, then apologized like it was all just a misunderstanding. But the mask didn't last. Behind closed doors, the control turned physical. One incident would leave a mark that never truly faded. Tanisha was holding her godchild, a 5-month-old baby boy, when Webster lost his temper. No warning. No build-up. He struck her. Twice. Open hand. The side of her head. While she held that baby. She dropped him. Just like that. She later wrote that part down. Not because she wanted to relive it, but because she knew what it meant. Because it had escalated. Because it wasn't just about her anymore. And yet, he didn't stop. He moved out eventually, but only in theory. He still showed up whenever he wanted. Sometimes unannounced. Sometimes hiding just out of view. One day he'd try to sweet-talk his way back. The next, he'd send violent threats over text. And when she blocked his number, he started calling from private lines. Over and over again. Day. Night. Tanisha's life started to shrink. Not just her social space, but her sense of peace. Because no matter where she was, home, work, even in uniform, he found a way to reach her. She didn't tell everyone, but her close circle knew something was wrong. Some of her coworkers saw the signs. Some of her family started to worry. Still, she kept going. She went to work. She smiled for her community. She posted those safety tips online. But underneath it all, she was living in survival mode. Because even after he moved out, Brandon Webster wasn't gone. He was circling, watching, and he was getting bolder. Uninvited, unrelenting, unstoppable. By May of 2020, Tanisha had had enough. Brandon Webster wasn't just showing up uninvited anymore. He was escalating. The violence, the threats, the stalking. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't subtle. And it wasn't going to stop on its own. So she did what the system tells victims to do. She documented everything. She went to court. She filed for a restraining order on May 22, 2020. In her sworn statement, she wrote, "Brandon struck me twice on the side of the head while I was holding my 5-month-old godchild. His actions caused me to drop the infant." She explained how he kept showing up, how he kept calling from private numbers after she blocked him, how the threats didn't stop just because the door was locked. She asked the court for protection, and she specifically asked that he be ordered to surrender his firearms. Not out of fear, out of foresight. Tanisha knew what could happen. She worked in law enforcement. She understood what it meant when an abuser has access to a gun. And she wasn't wrong. According to Everytown for Gun Safety, over 4.5 million women in the United States have reported being threatened with a gun by an intimate partner. And when a gun is present in a domestic violence situation, the risk of homicide increases by 500%. Tanisha knew those numbers weren't just statistics. They were warning signs. The court reviewed her petition, and on June 19, 2020, nearly a month later, they granted the restraining order. It prohibited Brandon from contacting, harassing, threatening, or stalking her. He was ordered to stay away from her home on Overview Drive. He was not allowed to show up at her job. But the court did not grant the most important part. They did not order him to give up his guns. No surrender. No confiscation. No follow-up. Even with the documented abuse. Even with her written plea. Even with a sworn statement describing how he attacked her while she held a baby. The firearms stayed with him. For Tanisha, that was a decision she couldn't afford. But she didn't give up. She followed every step. She followed protocol. She told the truth. She trusted the process. But the process didn't trust her back. And the order, ink on paper, was supposed to be her shield. But it came with holes. Deadly ones. It was a quiet Monday morning. July 6, 2020. The street was still. The homes on Overview Drive sat tucked behind lawns and porch lights, most windows dark. Inside one of them, Tanisha Pughsley was unwinding from the weekend. She wasn't on duty. She wasn't in uniform. She was just at home, with a male friend visiting. They weren't being loud. They weren't doing anything wrong. They were just talking. Until 2:15 a.m. There's no footage of the moment Brandon Webster approached the house. But we know what he brought with him, an AR-style rifle. We know he was not supposed to be there. And we know he wasn't there to talk. He forced the front door. The frame cracked. Tanisha and her guest heard it, just before the shouting started. Brandon came in fast, rifle in hand, screaming, demanding, "Who is this? Why is he here? What are you doing?" He wasn't rational. He wasn't scared. He was there to dominate. There was a scuffle. The male friend, caught between flight and fight, tried to disarm him. A physical struggle spilled through parts of the house. They fought. They grappled. But Brandon had the gun. The friend broke loose and ran, bolted out of the house. No time to think. Just get out. Just survive. And then, the sound of the door slamming shut behind him. And one final shot. Not a spray of bullets. Not chaos. Just one decision. One round. Straight to her chest. When neighbors called 911, all they could say was that they heard shouting and then gunfire. Someone was down. Someone was bleeding. Police arrived on scene within minutes. Montgomery PD officers. Tanisha's own department. Her own people. Her badge number still listed in the system. They found her on the floor of her home. Still, unmoving. There was nothing they could do. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Gunshot wound to the chest. The man she tried to escape, the one the court told to stay away, had murdered her inside the very home they once shared. He fled before the police arrived. Gone into the dark, into silence. But he left everything behind. The weapon, the damage, and the woman he couldn't control, now permanently silenced. Detectives who worked beside her found themselves staring at the broken door, at the overturned furniture, at the blood on the floor. This wasn't just another case. This was one of their own. A neighbor said the sirens didn't stop for hours. The street was lined with squad cars. Flashing lights bounced off mailboxes and garage doors. But for Tanisha Pughsley, the system that was supposed to protect her had arrived too late. She followed the law, but the law couldn't follow through. Brandon Webster didn't turn himself in. He didn't stay at the scene, and he didn't hesitate to run. After shooting Tanisha Pughsley in her own home, he disappeared into the night, leaving behind shattered drywall, spent shell casings, and the lifeless body of a woman who had once loved him. But this time, it wasn't just a domestic call. He hadn't attacked a neighbor or a stranger. He had murdered a sworn police officer. The entire Montgomery Police Department snapped into motion. The department's own detectives now had to work a scene that belonged to one of their own. There were no favors, no leniency, no looking the other way. They knew who the suspect was, and they knew what he'd done. Within hours, the case was turned over to the U.S. Marshals Gulf Coast Regional Fugitive Task Force, a specialized unit trained to track down high-risk, violent offenders. Webster hadn't vanished. He was on the run, but he wasn't invisible. Law enforcement followed the trail, cell phone pings, tips, surveillance, any movement he made. And just hours after the murder, they caught him. He was located, arrested, and transferred to the Montgomery County Detention Facility. No opportunity to flee across state lines. No bail hearing. No bond. This wasn't a simple murder charge. It wasn't even just about breaking a restraining order. Webster was hit with 2 counts of capital murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Each charge was loaded, stacked with legal weight, each one carrying the potential for a life sentence or even death. The first charge, capital murder during the commission of a burglary. By forcing his way into a home that no longer legally belonged to him, while armed, he escalated the crime to its highest tier. The second, capital murder while under a protection from abuse order. Alabama law doesn't play when it comes to protection orders. Violating one and then committing murder isn't just a violation. It's grounds for capital prosecution. And the third, attempted murder, for the male guest who escaped. The man who fought him. The man who ran for his life and lived to tell investigators what happened inside that house. Webster didn't just break into a home. He shattered every legal boundary already drawn in black and white. And now, those lines were coming back in the form of court filings, legal indictments, and an airtight case. There was no plea deal, no bail, no public apology. When Brandon Webster was booked, he wasn't a boyfriend. He wasn't a grieving ex. He was a suspect in the premeditated murder of a police detective who had asked the court to protect her. But the law that let him keep his weapons was now the same law preparing to put him away.
Love you.
It took more than 3 years for the case to get to trial. 3 years since Tanisha Pughsley was murdered in her own home. 3 years of silence, court filings, and mounting pressure. But in August 2023, the case finally went before a jury. Brandon Webster, clean-cut in a courtroom now, not crouched behind a rifle, was formally tried for the murder of Detective Tanisha Pughsley. He didn't show emotion, but the evidence spoke for him. The prosecution had built the case brick by brick, and they brought it all to the courtroom. First, the witness testimony. The male friend who survived that night. He stood in court, looked the jury in the eye, and described the moment Webster broke in. The shouting, the rifle, the scuffle, his escape, and that single shot that followed. The timeline was clear. His account was consistent, and his words painted the final moments of Tanisha's life in chilling detail. Next, the protection order, admitted into evidence. A court-stamped document from June 19, 2020. Signed, legal, active at the time of the murder. And in it, Tanisha's own handwriting, describing the exact behavior that preceded her death. The threats, the stalking, the physical assault while she held a baby. A plea for safety. And the court's response, visible in black and white, had denied the firearm surrender she requested. And then, the surveillance footage. Video that captured Brandon Webster fleeing the scene. Moments after the shooting. Caught on a nearby security camera. No alibi. No doubt. The prosecution laid it out cleanly. He entered unlawfully. He violated a court order. He brought a firearm he should have never had access to. And he killed a sworn officer of the law inside her home. His defense team tried to raise doubt about intent, about escalation, about emotional state. But the facts never flinched. The law didn't either. After days of testimony and deliberation, the jury came back. No hesitation. Guilty on all counts. Capital murder during the commission of a burglary. Capital murder in violation of a protective order. First-degree attempted assault for his attack on the surviving witness. The judge handed down the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Plus 10 additional years for the attempted assault. There would be no second chances. No early release. No appeals for leniency. It was justice, on paper, but in real time. It was years too late. The verdict didn't bring Tanisha back, but it did something else. It made the truth official. The system failed her. And now, the man who exploited that failure would never walk free again. In that courtroom, one detail lingered in the air longer than any sentence. The judge never forced Brandon Webster to give up his gun. Tanisha had asked. She didn't hint. She didn't imply. She asked, explicitly, for the court to make him surrender all firearms. And the court said no. So the AR-15 stayed in his possession. And 3 weeks later, it was the very weapon used to kill her. That's not a metaphor. That's a loophole. A legal gap that turned into a death sentence. And Tanisha's mother, Dr. Sharon Pughsley, never let anyone forget it. She could have disappeared into grief. But instead, she founded a movement. It's called Tookie's Voice, named after Tanisha's childhood nickname. And it's not just a foundation, it's a force. A nonprofit that provides resources for domestic violence survivors, runs public safety campaigns, and works hand-in-hand with local advocacy centers across Alabama. One of their key projects, Women on the Run, a partnership with the One Place Family Justice Center. They supply go bags, pre-packed essentials for survivors escaping abuse, toiletries, fresh clothes, hygiene kits. Because sometimes, safety means leaving with nothing and having something waiting.
Tell us about your organization and the mission.
So my organization is called Tookie's Voice. It's a nonprofit domestic violence organization. And our fight is to help other people who are fleeing bad situations to get out. And so this campaign we have is called Women on the Run, but it doesn't discriminate. Women on the Run means you're running away from a bad situation, you're running for your life, you're running for a new beginning. And so with our mission, what we do, we ask people to donate new or used gently totes or purses and fill them with things that a person would need.
But Tookie's Voice didn't stop at awareness. They built something permanent, something rooted, a peace garden. In 2023, a stretch of ground at 2625 Lower Wetumpka Road in Montgomery was transformed. It's quiet. There are benches, native flowers, hand-painted stones. It's not just a place to mourn, it's a place to heal. A space where survivors, families, officers, and children can gather and remember why vigilance matters. Why loopholes cost lives. Why Tanisha's story has to be retold. Dr. Pughsley spoke at the garden's unveiling. She stood in front of the press, the community, and the system that failed her daughter. And she said, "They let my daughter down. So now we speak for her." And the system, slowly, finally, started to listen.
Well, it's an honor. This is a place where my daughter volunteered, a place that she loved, and you can just feel the love here. Domestic violence is real, and regardless of your profession or your relationship, it can affect you. I'm a surviving victim of domestic violence because of what happened to my daughter.
In 2024, the Red Flag Protective Order Act, HB 49, was introduced in Alabama. It allows courts to mandate the surrender of firearms from individuals deemed dangerous to themselves or others, especially in domestic violence cases. The bill was followed in 2025 by the Gun Violence Protective Order Act, SB 170, reinforcing firearm restrictions and protective orders and providing law enforcement more authority to remove guns in crisis situations. These laws aren't retroactive. They couldn't save Tanisha, but they're trying to stop the next one, the next missed warning, the next deadly gap in the paperwork. And behind that change was a mother who refused to stay silent. They called her Tookie, not detective, not Officer Pughsley, just Tookie, a name that stuck from childhood, softening every room it entered. At her candlelight vigil, the air was thick with silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that only shows up when a community is holding its breath. Over 100 officers stood side by side in uniform. Family, friends, little girls she used to mentor, neighbors who only knew her from across the street but came anyway. People held purple and white balloons, colors chosen for what they symbolized: domestic violence awareness and the life of a woman who fought it from both sides of the badge. They told stories that don't make headlines, like how she'd keep protein bars in her glove compartment to hand out to unhoused people on patrol, how she stayed after work to help a teen mom fill out job applications, how she'd quietly leave groceries on a struggling neighbor's porch without ever mentioning it was her. Her legacy wasn't just her title, it was the way she carried it. She was a cop, yes, but she was also someone's sister, someone's mentor, someone who still believed that even in a broken world, people deserved to feel safe. And maybe the clearest window into who she was came through something she posted online. A Facebook post. Simple, direct, no fluff. "Ladies, with all that's going on today, please make sure you're careful. Don't go out alone. Please get trained. Please stay alive." It wasn't about fear. It was about preparation. It was a woman who knew danger and still wanted better for others. Even when the system wouldn't protect her, she still tried to protect them. She tried to warn the world, even when it was already too late for her. And maybe that's the most haunting part. Not just how she died, but how clearly she saw it coming and still couldn't stop it. Now, her voice lives on in echoes, in vigils, in a peace garden, in every woman reading her words and deciding to take safety seriously. Because Tookie did. And if there's any justice left to be done, It's in making sure her story is never silenced again. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit the like button to help it reach more people. Subscribe to True Crime Undercover for more stories that deserve to be heard. And turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Because sometimes, awareness is the first form of justice. And silence only helps the ones who get away with it.